The appraiser had judged 40,000 warships in his long life, and not one of them had ever made him laugh until the morning the humans wheeled their little gray ship onto the floor of the Grand Reckoning Exchange. His name was Harold Vossen, and he was the senior valuer of the Reckoning, which meant that across 900 systems, his word was the difference between a navy worth fearing and a navy worth scrapping. He had a voice like a slow bell, and eyes that had stopped being impressed somewhere around his 3,000th year. When a species wanted to join the great markets of the Inner Ring, they did not send ambassadors. They sent their best warship to the exchange, and they let Harold Vossen look at it, and they accepted whatever number he spoke aloud. That number decided everything. A high number bought a seat at the tables where the old powers carved up trade lanes and mining belts. A low number bought a polite escort back out of the ring, and a file marked unready. No species had ever argued with the appraiser, because the appraiser had never once been wrong. 40,000 judgments, 40,000 outcomes, and the great wheel of the markets had turned smoothly on the strength of his eye. The exchange itself was not a station and not a planet. It was a hollowed moon, opened up and floored over, a single vast hall the size of a small sea, lit from above by a captured sliver of a dying star. Tiered galleries climbed the curved walls, and in those galleries sat the buyers and the rivals and the gamblers of 40 species, all of them there to watch a new navy be measured and to bet on the number that the old appraiser would speak. On the morning the humans came, the galleries were fuller than Harold Vossen had seen them in a century. Word had gone ahead. The young species from the wet blue world had finally agreed to be judged, after 11 years of refusing every invitation, and the Inner Ring had come to enjoy the spectacle. Everyone already knew what the spectacle would be. The humans were poor. The humans were small. The humans had crossed into the ring in slow ships that leaked heat like wounded animals. The betting was not about whether the number would be low. The betting was about how low, and how the humans would take it, and whether the appraiser would bother to be gentle. Harold Vossen did not intend to be gentle. He intended to be accurate, which in the case of the humans he expected to be much the same thing. The great doors at the floor's edge ground open, and the human ship came in. It came in on a slow tractor sled, because it could not be trusted to fly inside the hall, and the sight of it drew the first laugh from the galleries, before the doors had even finished opening. It was gray, not the deep gray of a serious warship, but the flat, dull gray of something cheap, something painted by hand. It was small, barely 400 strides from nose to tail, a length the inner navies used for cargo tugs and patrol boats. Its hull was scarred. Whole panels of it were a different shade from the rest, replacements, patches, the marks of a ship that had been hurt many times and mended on a budget. Its lines were ugly. There was nothing elegant in it, nothing proud, none of the long sweeping curves that the old species built into their warships to say without words that here was power. It looked, Harold Vossen thought, like a fist. A blunt, dented, much-used fist, and the galleries above it laughed and laughed. He let them laugh. He always did. A crowd that had laughed early was a crowd that listened closely later, when the number came, and the number was the only thing that mattered. He stepped down onto the floor, his long robe of office trailing the dust of the dying star, and he walked toward the little gray ship the way he had walked toward 40,000 others. Beside the ship stood a single human. That, too, was unusual. Other species sent delegations, whole rows of officers in their finest, anxious and sweating, and ready to defend their work. The humans had sent one. She stood with her hands folded behind her back, a small figure in a plain dark uniform, with no decoration, that Harold Vossen could read as rank. She watched him come, and she did not look afraid, and she did not look proud either. She looked, more than anything, patient, the way a person looks when they already know how a thing is going to end, and they are simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. He stopped a few strides from her, and he let his eyes climb the ship. This was the part the galleries loved, the appraiser's look. He could read a hull the way a physician read a body, and he read this one now, slow and open, so the watchers could follow his eyes and know what he saw. He saw the cheap reactive plating, thinner than the ring standard, the kind a serious navy would be ashamed to mount. He saw the welded patches and counted them, 19, each one a place where the ship had been holed and healed. He saw the small weapon ports, undersized, the throat of a ship that could not possibly mount a heavy gun. He saw the cooling fins, too few of them, which meant the ship could not run its systems hot for long without cooking itself. He saw an old design, a tired design, a design that the inner ring had moved past 3 centuries ago. He saw, in short, a weak warship, the weakest he had ever been asked to judge. The galleries had gone quiet now, the way they always did when the appraiser's eyes were working, and into that quiet, Harold Vossen did something he had not done in 40,000 judgments. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of an old expert who has been handed a joke and intends to enjoy it in front of an audience. He turned to the galleries, and he spread his hands. "My friends," he said, and the captured star caught his voice and threw it to every tier. "I have been asked many strange things in this hall. I have been asked to value a ship made of living coral. I have been asked to value a ship that its builders swore could not be seen, and which I could, in fact, see perfectly well." A ripple of laughter at that, the old joke, the one they expected from him. "But never, in all my years, have I been asked to value scrap and call it a navy." The laughter came back hard. He waited for it. "This," he said, sweeping one long arm toward the little gray ship, "is what the wet world sends to the reckoning. 400 strides. Plating I would not trust on a grain hauler. 19 wounds, mended with the kind of weld a child learns in a yard. Guns that could not crack the hull of a customs boat." He let his hand fall. "I have not even begun my measure, and already I can tell you, my friends, what the number will be. It will be low. It will be the lowest number this hall has heard in 100 years. And then the wet world will go home and learn its place, and perhaps in another 1,000 years it will come back with something worth my time." The galleries roared. Bets shifted. Somewhere high up, a syndicate of weapons brokers were already laughing among themselves about who would buy the salvage rights to the joke. Harold Vossen turned back to the human, pleased with himself, ready to begin the slow ceremony of the actual measure, the scans and the soundings that would put a real number to the scrap. The human had not moved. Her hands were still folded behind her back. She was still watching him with that patient look, and now that he was close, he could see something in it that he had mistaken, from a distance, for calm. It was not calm. It was something quieter, and much worse. It was the look of someone being kind to you, because they know something you do not, and they have decided not to spoil it too soon. "Appraiser Vossen," she said. Her voice was even. It carried, though she had not raised it. "My name is Isia Maren. I command the ship you are looking at." She paused. "Before you begin your measure, my crew asked me to tell you one thing. Out of respect. You have been honest with us, so we would like to be honest with you." He inclined his head, generous in his amusement. "By all means, Commander. Honesty is the soul of a good market." "The ship is not weak," said Aya Maren. The galleries laughed again, but it was thinner now, because there had been nothing in her voice to laugh at. She had not boasted. She had not raised her chin or her volume. She had simply stated a fact, the way the appraiser himself stated facts, and the very flatness of it landed in the hall like a stone dropped down a well. Harold Vossen smiled wider. "Of course not," he said. "Forgive me. Tell me, Commander, what is its true and terrible strength that my poor old eyes have missed?" "You misread the plating," she said. "It is not thin because we could not afford thick. It is thin on purpose. The 19 patches you counted are not wounds. They are doors. The guns you called undersized are not the ship's weapons. They are its eyes." She tilted her head, just slightly. "And the ship is not for sale, appraiser. We did not bring it here to be valued. We brought it here so that when the time comes, and it will come, every species in this hall will remember that they saw it once, and were warned, and laughed." The hall was very quiet now. "You have judged 40,000 ships," she said, gently, almost sorry for him. "You have never judged one of ours. I am going to ask you to do something you have never done in your life, appraiser. I am going to ask you to take back your number before you speak it." She unfolded her hands. "Because if you speak it, the ship will answer, and it only ever speaks once." Harold Vossen looked at the small gray ship, at the 19 patches he had counted with such certainty, and for the first time in 3,000 years, a thin, cold thread of doubt moved through him. He looked at the patient woman. He should have stopped. He knew, later, with the clarity that comes too late, that this was the moment, and that everything which followed turned on it. He should have closed his mouth and walked off the floor, and gone home, and told the markets that the humans were not ready for judgment. Instead, the appraiser laughed, because the galleries were watching, and the joke was too good, and 40,000 judgments had taught him that he was never wrong. Then let it answer, he said. And he spoke his number. The number Harold Vossen spoke was 4. On the scale of the reckoning, which ran from 1 to 10,000, a number of 4 meant nothing. It meant rubbish. It meant a hull fit for the breaking yards, a navy that could not defend a fishing fleet, a species that should be grateful to be allowed back out of the ring alive. In 40,000 judgments, the appraiser had never spoken a number lower than 200, and he had spoken that only once, to a people who had arrived in ships made of stitched hide and good intentions. He gave the humans a 4. He gave it slowly, savoring it, letting each part of the word fall into the silence of the hall, so that every gallery and every broker and every gambler heard the smallest number in the history of the reckoning land on the small gray ship. And the moment the number left his mouth, the lights of the dying star went out. Not flickered. Went out, the captured sliver above them, the star that had lit the exchange without fail for 9,000 years, simply stopped, as if a hand had closed over it, and the great hollow moon dropped into a darkness so total that Harold Vossen heard, before he saw anything at all, the sound of 40 species in 40 galleries, drawing one breath together. Then the gray ship spoke. It did not speak in words. Ia Maren had said it would answer, and the appraiser had imagined, dimly, some clever human trick, a recording, a light show, a boast dressed up to frighten the gullible. He had judged 40,000 ships, and every one of them had been silent metal that did exactly what its number said. He had no place in his mind for what happened now. The gray hull lit from within. A single line of light traced itself down the length of the ship, nose to tail, thin and white and certain, and where it passed the 19 patches that the appraiser had counted as wounds, the patches opened. Not blew open, opened, smoothly, the way a thing opens that was built to open. And from each of the 19 came a low sound, a single sustained tone. 19 tones, that did not clash but stacked, one upon another, into a chord that Harold Vossen felt in the floor of the moon, through the soles of his feet. It was the most beautiful and the most frightening sound he had ever heard, and it was the ship clearing its throat. In the galleries, the instruments of 40 species came alive at once, because every buyer in the inner ring carried sounders and scopes and field readers, the tools they used to take their own private measure of any ship the appraiser judged. They had brought them today as a joke, to confirm the 4, to laugh at the small numbers their own instruments would surely show. Their instruments did not show small numbers. A weapons broker named Sethric Oal, who sat in the 3rd gallery, and who would later be the second creature in the hall to truly understand what he was looking at, glanced down at his field reader, expecting to see a hull power of perhaps a few hundred units, the kind of trickle a patrol boat put out. His field reader showed him a wall, not a number, a wall, the reading climbing so fast and so far past the top of the scale that the device simply gave up and showed him the symbol it was built to show, only when something was too large to measure, the symbol the brokers called the open mouth, because it looked like a circle with no bottom. Sethric Oal had owned that field reader for 200 years and had never once seen the open mouth. Now he saw it, and beside it, in small honest letters, the only line of plain language the device could still produce. Source not a ship. He read it 3 times. Then he looked up at the small gray hull glowing white in the dark, 19 open doors singing their stacked chord, and he understood, with the cold, clean understanding of a man who has spent his life measuring weapons, that the appraiser had made a mistake that could not be taken back. On the floor, Harold Vossen stood in the dark in the rising chord, and he could not move. He had judged 40,000 ships, and he had read this one in less than a minute, and now the ship was telling him, in a voice that bypassed every word, and went straight into the bones of the moon, exactly how wrong he had been. The thin plating he had despised was not armor at all. He understood that now. A thing that did not intend to be hit did not need armor. The thinness was not weakness. It was the lightness of something built to be somewhere else before the blow arrived. The undersized guns he had mocked were not guns. They were, as the woman had told him, eyes, 19 of them, and they were open now, and he had the sudden and certain feeling of being looked at by something very large and very old that had been pretending, for reasons of its own, to be small. "Commander," he said, and his slow bell voice came out cracked. "Commander Moren, what is this?" She had not moved through any of it. She stood in the white light of her own ship with her hands at her sides, and she answered him kindly, the way you answer a child who has finally asked the right question. "This is the answer, appraiser," she said. "You gave the ship a number. The ship is giving you one back. It is only fair." Above the floor, in the dark galleries, the open mouth bloomed on instrument after instrument, and a sound began to spread through the tiers that the Grand Reckoning Exchange had never held before. It was the sound of the inner ring, the old powers, the buyers and the rivals and the gamblers of 40 species, beginning, very quietly, to be afraid. Harold Vossen forced himself to think. He had spent 3,000 years on the floor of this hall, and panic was beneath him, and a measure was a measure even now. So he made himself look, truly look, the way he had not looked the first time, because he had been too busy enjoying the joke. He looked at the ship as a ship, and asked it the questions an appraiser asks, and one by one the little gray hull answered them, and each answer was worse than the last. How does it move? He had assumed it crawled, because it had come into the ring leaking heat. But the heat it had leaked, he saw now in the readings the galleries were broadcasting in their terror, was not waste. It was a tell, a deliberate weakness, the ship breathing out warmth like an animal, pretending to be sick so that the hunters would come close. It moved, when it chose to move, not on the slow, steady push of the inner navies, but in jumps, short folds of distance that left no trail, and the cooling fins he had called too few were too few, because the ship did not run hot when it worked. It ran cold. It worked the way the dark itself worked, quietly, and at a temperature that no instrument in the galleries had thought to look for. What does it carry? He had counted the small ports and called them undersized weapons. He had been so sure. But the 19 open doors were not gun ports, and the singing was not noise. And as he listened, he understood that the chord was structured, that it was 19 voices, saying the same 19-part thing over and over, and that the thing they were saying was a count. The ship was counting. It was counting the galleries. It was counting the buyers and the rivals and the gamblers, 40 species, every hull and every gun in the hollow moon, and it was doing it the way a careful person counts coins, not to spend them, but to know exactly how many there are. Who built it? This was the question that broke the last of the appraiser's certainty, because the answer his trained eye gave him was that no one had built it the way ships were built, all at once, to a plan. The little gray hull had grown. The 19 patches were not repairs of 19 wounds. They were the marks of 19 times the ship had been added to, made larger on the inside than the outside, fitted with one more door, one more eye, one more voice, across a span of time that his instinct put it far longer than the 11 years the humans had been crossing into the ring. The ship was older than the humans' reach, much older, and it had let itself be wheeled in on a sled, and let itself be called scrap, and let an old appraiser laugh at it in front of 40 species, for the simple reason that it had wanted to be underestimated, and had judged, correctly, that it would be. Harold Vossen had spent his whole life as the one who judged. It had never once occurred to him that he might be the one being judged. "You are not a navy," he said to the woman, and he hardly knew he was speaking aloud. "You did not come to be valued." "No," said Aya Moren. "You came to be remembered." "Yes," she said, and for the first time, something moved in her patient face, something that was almost gentleness and almost grief. "You will be the one who remembers, appraiser. That is why we let you keep your number. 4. It is a good number. It is the smallest you have ever given. When you tell this story, and you will tell it for the rest of your long life, you will start with 4, and the galaxy will laugh, because that is how the story has to start." She nodded slowly. "And then they will see what 4 bought them, and they will never laugh again." In the dark above, a single voice cracked the silence. It came from the highest gallery, from the seat of the oldest power in the ring. an envoy of the Suthal Concord, a species that had ruled the inner markets for 40,000 years and had never in all that time heard a number it did not control. The envoy's voice was thin, with a feeling its kind had 100 careful words for, and had never needed any of them. "Turn it off," the envoy said. "Appraiser. Make it stop. Make it stop counting." Herald Vossen looked at the woman. She looked back at him with a terrible kind patience. "I cannot make it stop," he said. "Can I, Commander?" "No," she agreed. "But you can ask it why it is counting. I think, Appraiser, that you would like to know." He did not want to know. Every old and careful instinct in him screamed not to ask. But he had been the appraiser for 3,000 years, and the appraiser asked, always, even when the asking was a knife, because the number was the only thing that mattered, and you could not speak the number until you had asked everything. "Why," he said, "is it counting?" The chord changed. It did not grow louder. It deepened. The 19 voices dropping together into a register that the floor of the moon carried up through the galleries, so that 40 species felt the question being answered in the marrow of their own bones. And in the white light of the open doors, the ship showed them. It was not a weapon that came out of the 19 doors. Herald Vossen, in the long nights after, was never able to make the buyers understand this, because they all assumed there must have been a weapon, that the number 4 had bought them a gun. There was no gun. What came out of the doors was light, and the light arranged itself in the air of the hollow moon into a thing the appraiser recognized, slowly, with a dawning horror that aged him more than 3,000 years had managed. It was a map of the inner ring. 900 systems, hung in the dark of the hall, each one a small bright point, and the human's little gray ship, turning slowly at the center of them, so that every gallery could see. And as the map turned, certain points on it changed, not many. A few dozen, scattered across the 900 systems, and each of the changed points dimmed, slowly, from bright to dark, the way a star goes out, until the map showed the ring as it was, and then, beside it, the ring as it would be. The dimmed points were the systems whose envoys sat in the galleries laughing, an hour ago, at the small gray ship. "It is counting," said Aya Maren quietly, "because it always counts before it speaks. It learned to do that a long time ago, from a people who counted everything and valued nothing, the way you valued my ship today. It is showing you what it counted. It is showing you who laughed." She paused, and the kindness in her voice was the worst thing in the hall. "It is not a threat, appraiser. The ship does not threaten. A threat is a thing you say when you might not do it. The ship is simply being accurate. You taught us that the number is the only thing that matters, so the ship is giving you the number." Herald Vossen looked at the turning map, at the few dozen points going slowly dark, and he did the thing an appraiser does without meaning to, the thing he had done 40,000 times. He read the number. The number was not 4. He did not say it aloud. He could not. But every instrument in every gallery was screaming it now. The open mouth on all of them, the honest small line beneath it, source not a ship, and the appraiser of the Grand Reckoning Exchange stood on the floor of the hollow moon in the white light of 19 singing doors, and understood that he had, with his own slow careful voice and his own perfect eye, mocked the single most powerful thing he had ever stood beside, and given it permission to answer, in front of 40 species, on the busiest day the hall had known in 100 years. "Take it back," whispered the envoy of the Suthal Concord, from the highest seat in the ring. "Appraiser, your number, take it back." It was the same thing the woman had asked him to do, before, when there had still been time, when he had laughed instead. He remembered laughing. He would remember it for the rest of his long life. "Commander Maren," he said, and his voice was steady now, because there is a calm on the far side of terror that the very old sometimes reach. "What does the ship want?" She considered him. "It wants what it has," she said, "to be remembered. That is all, appraiser. It did not come here to dim a single one of those systems. The map is not a plan. It is a mirror. It is showing the ring what the ring would have to its own face if the small gray ship were the kind of thing you called it. Scrap, a 4, a joke wheeled in on a sled." She let the words settle. "It is showing you that you cannot tell the difference with all your 40,000 judgments between a thing too weak to matter and a thing strong enough to end you. You looked at the same hull and saw a 4. Your eye, appraiser. The best eye in 900 systems, and it was wrong by a margin no instrument in this hall can even hold. Herald Vossen made himself look at the map one more time before he asked his next question, because the appraiser in him would not let the others see him flinch from a thing he had not finished reading. The few dozen dimmed systems hung dark beside their bright twins, and he counted them the way he counted everything, slowly, honestly, and as he counted, he noticed a thing that the terror in the galleries had hidden from everyone else. The dimmed systems were not the strongest in the ring. They were not the largest navies, or the richest belts, or the oldest powers. They were, every one of them, the ones whose envoys had laughed the loudest and earliest when the small gray ship came in on its sled. The map had not chosen them by their strength. It had chosen them by their certainty. It is not measuring our hulls, the appraiser said slowly, half to himself. The map. It is not showing the systems it could break. It is showing the systems that laughed. Yes, said Aya Maren. You see it now. Good. You are quick, appraiser, for a creature that has been certain for 3,000 years. She let the map turn between them. The ship does not care how many hulls a people has. A hull is a thing it can hold in one hand, the way it is holding your star. What the ship watches is the laughing. The laughing is the sickness, appraiser. The laughing is the sound a people makes in the last hour before it reaches too far and meets the dark. We have heard it at 100 deathbeds. It is always the same. They laugh at the small thing, and they are certain, and then they are silent. She looked at him steadily. You laughed first and loudest, appraiser. By your own scale, you should be the brightest point on that map, the best eye in 900 systems, and you were the most certain creature in this hall, which means by the only scale that matters, the ship's scale, you were the closest of all of them to the dark. The map could have dimmed you first. It did not. Ask yourself why. The old appraiser looked at his own system on the map, bright, undimmed, whole, sitting among the few dozen dark ones, and he understood. And the understanding humbled him more than all the rest of it. Because I stopped laughing, he said. Because I asked the questions, because I let myself be wrong. Yes, said Aya Maren softly. The map is not a map of who we could destroy, appraiser. It never was. It is a map of who is still curing themselves, and who is not. The dark points are not condemned, they are only warned. The moment one of them stops laughing and starts asking, its point will go bright again. The way yours stayed bright, because the sickness is the certainty, and the cure is the question, and the ship has been waiting 900 years to teach a single ring of certain peoples the difference. She let her hand fall. That is the whole of the war, not hulls against hulls, questions against certainty. And there has only ever needed to be one ship, appraiser, because there has only ever been one cure, and it is the cheapest thing in the galaxy, and the rarest, and you spent it for free. The moment you said the words, I was wrong. The map turned. The dimmed points hung dark beside their bright twins. The ship will speak once more, said Aya Maren. And then we will go. We will not come back to be valued, appraiser, because you have shown us what your valuing is worth. We will simply be out there, in the dark, doing what we have always done, which is the work that ships like this one do. She looked up at the galleries, at the 40 species frozen in their tears. And the next time a small gray hull crosses into your ring, leaking heat, painted by hand, 19 patches in its skin, you will not laugh. None of you, not for 1,000 years. That is the only thing we came for. That is the whole of it. She turned back to Herald Vossen. Ask it the last question, appraiser, she said. The one you are afraid of. It will only answer once. He knew the question. It had been forming in him since the lights went out. The question that the best appraiser in the inner ring had never once needed to ask in 40,000 judgments, because he had always been the one who knew. He looked at the small gray ship that he had called a 4. How many of you are there? Said Herald Vossen. The cord stopped. The silence that fell was so complete that the appraiser heard his own old heart, and the held breath of 40 species, and somewhere far up in the dark, a single instrument still whispering its honest small line into the quiet. Source not a ship, source not a ship, source not a ship. Then the gray hull began, very slowly, to glow brighter, and the 19 doors drew in one long breath together to speak the answer. And Herald Vossen realized, in the last moment before it spoke, that he did not want to hear it, and that it was far, far too late to take his number back. The ship answered the appraiser's last question with a single point of light. 1. After the map and the cord and the dimming systems, after the open mouth had bloomed on every instrument in the hall, the human's little gray ship gathered all its white fire into one small bright point hanging in the dark air of the hollow moon, and held it there, alone, and let the inner ring look at it. How many of you are there? 1. This one. The hull on the sled. The 4. For a moment, the galleries did not understand, and there was a stir of something almost like relief, because 1 was a number a frightened mind could hold. 1 ship. 1 ship could be hunted. 1 ship could be cornered, ringed, ground down by the great navies of the inner powers, given enough hulls and enough guns, and enough patience. The envoy of the Suthal Concord drew a breath to say so, to begin the long cold arithmetic of 40,000 years of rule, the arithmetic that always, in the end, came down to numbers, and the Concord had always had the larger number. Then the single point of light divided. It did not split in half. It did what a thing does that has been pretending to be one thing while being another. It opened, the way the 19 doors had opened, and inside the one point of light there was another, and inside that another, and the bright mote in the air of the hall unfolded itself outward, into a depth that the eye could not follow, point within point within point, until the galleries understood that they had been shown not one ship, but the place where one ship came from, and that the place had no bottom that any instrument in the hall could find. 1, said Ia Maren, into the silence. It is true. We brought you one. This is the only one in the ring. Appraiser. And it will be the only one for as long as the ring remembers today. We are not many. We never needed to be. She watched the unfolding light without any pride at all. You count hulls. You always have. The whole of your great markets is built on counting hulls, and the bigger the count, the safer the sleep. That is your weakness, and it is not a small one. You looked at our one ship, and you were not afraid, because 1 is a number you have beaten 10,000 times. She turned her patient eyes on the highest gallery. But you were never beating one ship. You were beating one species' habit of building ships your way. We do not build them your way. We build them the way you have just seen, and we only ever needed one. The unfolding point of light steadied, and held, and shone, and the inner ring stared into the bottomless depth of a single human warship, and at last began, in earnest, to be afraid, in the way that the very old and very powerful are afraid, which is the worst fear of all, because it is the fear of having been wrong for a very long time. Heralt Vossen stood on the floor and let the fear go past him, because he was beyond it now, in the calm on the far side. He had spent 3,000 years measuring, and there was one measure left in him, the most important of his life, and he meant to take it properly before the humans went. Commander, he said, I would like to understand, not for the markets, for myself. You did not have to bring the ship here at all. You refused us for 11 years. You could have refused us forever, stayed in your dark, done your work, and let the ring sleep on its count of hulls in peace. He spread his old hands. Why come? Why let me wheel you in on a sled and call you a 4 in front of 40 species? You knew exactly what I would say. You came so that I would say it. Why? Ia Maren was quiet for a while. The bottomless light turned slowly between them. Because of what happens to species that are never warned, she said at last. We have seen it, appraiser. Out in the dark, where we do our work, we have found the leavings of 100 peoples who got strong without ever once being humbled. They counted their hulls, and their hulls were many, and no one ever made them afraid, and so they came, in the end, to believe that strength was the same thing as worth, that a big number meant a good people, that the right to a thing was simply the power to take it. She looked up at the galleries, at the dimmed point still hanging in the dark map beside their bright twins. Your ring is on that road, appraiser. 40,000 years of judging others, and never once being judged. You have a man whose voice can scrap a navy with a number, and no one has ever told him he might be wrong, and so today he looked at the most dangerous thing in 900 systems and called it a 4, and laughed, and the whole ring laughed with him. She shook her head slowly. That is not strength. That is a people that has never been afraid, and a people that has never been afraid will do something one day that cannot be undone. because they will not have learned, in time, that the universe does not owe them their count. She let that sit in the hall. So we came, she said, once, to be the warning. We let you see one ship and call it nothing, so that every species in this hall would carry, for the rest of their long histories, the memory of the day they were certain, and certain, and certain, and wrong. You will not stop counting hulls, appraiser. I do not ask you to. But the next time the count makes you feel safe, you will remember the 4, and the memory of the 4 will make you careful. And a careful people is a people that lives long enough to grow wise. She almost smiled. We did not come to dim your systems. We came to keep you from dimming yourselves. It is the only kind of war worth a ship like this one, the kind you win by making sure it never has to be fought. In the third gallery, the weapons broker Sethric Oal lowered his field reader at last. The open mouth still glowed on it. He had been a buyer and a seller of force for 200 years, and he had built his whole long life on the belief that the strongest hand took the table. And he sat now in the dark and felt that belief come apart in him quietly, the way ice comes apart in spring, with a small sound and then a great one. Because the human was right. He had laughed at the 4. He had been certain. His certainty had been the most expensive thing he owned, and a small gray ship painted by hand had just shown him that it was worth nothing, that the best instrument in the ring, and the best eye in the ring, and the oldest power in the ring, had all looked at the same hull and seen a joke. And if they could be that wrong about a ship sitting still on a sled in their own hall, under their own lights, with all their tools in their hands, then they could be wrong about anything, anything at all. The whole vast, confident structure of the inner ring, 900 systems, sure of their place, was built on the appraiser's eye, and the appraiser's eye had just been broken in front of everyone, gently, on purpose, by a species that had then declined to hurt a single one of them. That was the part Sethric Oal could not get past, in the years that followed, the part he told and retold until his own grandchildren were sick of it. They had us. The humans had the whole ring in that hall, 40 species, every old power in 900 systems, frozen and afraid, and certain at last that one ship could end them. And they did nothing. They showed us the map, and they let the dark points fade, and then they let them fade back to bright, every one, and they took their 4, and they went home. They had the strongest hand anyone in the ring had ever seen, and they laid it face up on the table, and they did not take the pot. Sethric Oal had spent his life believing the strongest hand always took the pot. He never fully recovered from learning that it did not have to. On the floor, Herald Vossen bowed his head. It was not a gesture the appraiser of the Grand Reckoning Exchange had ever made to a ship. He had stood straight before 40,000 of them, the judge, the eye, the voice that the markets turned on. He bowed now to the small gray hull, and to the patient woman beside it, slowly, an old creature, acknowledging at last the one thing he had spent 3,000 years being too certain to learn. I was wrong, he said. The words were strange in his mouth. He had never said them in the hall. I gave you a 4. I will give you no other number, Commander, because I see now that I cannot. There is no number on my scale for what you are. My scale runs to 10,000, and it was built by people who count hulls. And you have shown me that the scale is a child's toy, and I am a child who has played with it for 3,000 years, and called it wisdom. He straightened, and met her eyes. I will keep the 4. You are right that I should. I will tell the story for the rest of my life, and I will start it with 4, and the galaxy will laugh, and then I will show them what 4 bought. It is the only honest thing left for me to do. He paused. Thank you, Commander, for not dimming us. We did not deserve the mercy. We laughed. Ia Maren looked at the old appraiser for a long moment, and something in her patient face softened into the first real warmth the hall had seen from her. You are the first, she said quietly. The first what? The first in 40 species in this hall to say I was wrong. She glanced up at the galleries, at the envoy of the Suthal Concord, who had ruled the markets for 40,000 years, and had still not said it, and never would. They will all remember the 4, appraiser, but you are the only one who understood why we gave it to you. The rest will go home and build bigger hulls and tell themselves the count will keep them safe, and they will be a little more careful, and that is enough. That is all we came for. But you understood. She inclined her head to him, the judge to the judged, the strong to the strong. That is rare. that is rarer than this ship. A people that grows a man who can stand in the wreck of his own certainty and say the words out loud, where everyone can hear, with nothing forcing him to. We look for that, out in the dark, more than we look for anything. It is the only sign worth finding. The bottomless light began, gently, to fold itself back in, point folding into point, depth drawing up into depth, until the unfolded infinity in the air of the hall was a single bright mote again, and then the mote drew back into the 19 open doors, and the doors began to close. "We are going now," said Aya Maren. "The ship has spoken. It only ever speaks once, and it has said everything it came to say." She turned toward the small gray hull, then paused, and looked back at the old appraiser one last time. "There is one thing more it will do before we leave, appraiser. It is for you. It is not a threat, and it is not a mercy. It is just the last of the answer, the part that you, of all of them, have earned the right to see." She studied him. "You asked how many of us there are, and the ship said one. That was true, but you did not ask the question underneath it. You did not ask why one is enough. The ship is going to show you. And when it does, appraiser, you will understand what your ring has been measuring all this time, and what it has never once thought to measure, and why your scale that runs to 10,000 will never hold us." The 19 doors were almost shut. The white line of light was drawing back toward the nose of the ship. In the galleries, 40 species leaned forward in the dark, because they too wanted to know, even through their fear, even the envoy of the Suthal Concord, even Sethric Oal, with the open mouth still glowing on the reader in his hands. They wanted to know the thing underneath. Why one was enough. Harold Vossen looked at the small gray ship that he had called a four, and he found that he was not afraid anymore. He was something else, something he had not felt since he was very young, and the markets had not yet made him certain. He was curious. He wanted, with his whole old heart, to be shown the thing he had spent 3,000 years not knowing. "Show me," he said. And the last door on the small gray ship paused, half open, and the line of light stopped where it was, and the human's warship gathered itself one final time to answer the question the appraiser had not known to ask. The thing the ship showed Harold Vossen was a memory. It came out of the half-open door not as light this time, but as something the appraiser felt before he saw, a pressure behind his eyes, and then the hollow moon and the galleries and the 40 frightened species faded down to gray at the edges of his sight, and in the center of him, the small gray ship opened a window into its own long past and let the old appraiser look through. He saw the dark, not the dark of the hall with its dead star, but the true dark, the empty between the systems, far out past the edge of the inner ring, where the markets had never bothered to go because there was nothing out there to count. And in that dark he saw the ship, the same small gray ship, younger, with only 3 patches in its skin instead of 19, and he understood that he was being shown the beginning, the first of the work, the reason the humans had built a thing like this at all. He saw what the ship had found out there. A world dead. A people gone. Not killed in a war, the appraiser saw, with the trained eye that could read a hull and now found itself reading the leavings of a whole species. There were no scars of battle on that dead world. There were no enemy fleets, no craters, no glassed cities. The people had simply grown strong, and counted their strength, and grown certain, and the certainty had done what certainty does, given enough time, and no one to break it. They had reached too far, too sure, into something they had not measured, because they had stopped believing anything could be larger than their count, and the something had been larger, and they were gone. The ship had arrived 1,000 years too late to warn them. It had found only the silence and the leavings and the lesson. Then the appraiser saw the next world, and the next. The window opened and opened, the way the light had opened, depth within depth, and Harold Vossen was shown 100 dead worlds, and 100 gone peoples, scattered across the great dark beyond the ring, and every single one of them had died the same way. Not in war, in certainty. Each of them had grown strong, and counted the strength, and believed the count, and reached too far, and each of them had met the thing they had not measured, and each of them was silent now, and the small gray ship had come to each of them 1,000 years too late. That was when the humans had understood. The appraiser saw. That was the moment the window showed him last. the men and women of the wet blue world, standing in the leavings of the 100th dead people, looking at the silence, doing the arithmetic that no one in the inner ring had ever done. The thing that killed peoples was not weakness. Weak peoples were careful, and careful peoples lived. The thing that killed peoples was strength without fear. A people that had never been humbled would, given long enough, mistake its count for the law of the universe, and reach for the one thing too large to take, and be gone. And there would be no one to warn the next one, because the warning always came 1,000 years too late. So the humans had built a ship to come on time. That was the answer, underneath the answer. That was why one was enough. The ship had not been built to fight the inner ring, or any navy, because navies were not the disease. The disease was certainty, and you did not fight certainty with hulls. You fought it with a single moment, delivered once, to a whole people at the height of their pride, a moment in which their best eye, and their best instrument, and their oldest power, all looked at the truth, and called it a four, and laughed. You did not need 1,000 ships for that. You needed one ship, and the patience to be wheeled in on a sled, and the discipline to take the laughter, and the mercy to leave without taking the pot. One ship, arriving on time, once, in 900 years, to make a confident people careful, before their certainty could kill them. The window closed, the hollow moon came back, and the galleries, and the 40 species, and the small gray ship with its last door half open, and the patient woman standing beside it, watching the appraiser come back to himself. Herald Vossen discovered that his face was wet. He had not wept in 3,000 years. He did not try to hide it. 100 worlds, he said. More, said Aya Maren gently. 100 is only what the ship showed you. It chose the number it thought you could carry. She looked up at the galleries, where 40 species sat in the dark, having seen every one of them, the same window, the same 100 silences. Every people in this hall just watched 100 others die of exactly the thing your ring is dying of, slowly, comfortably. Sure of the count. That is the warning, appraiser. That is the whole of the war we came to fight. Not against you, for you. The same war we have fought at 100 deathbeds, except that this time, for the first time, we came early enough that the patient can still be saved. There was one moment, near the end, that Harold Vossen never told the markets about, because it was too small for the story and too large for him to share. It came while the ship was showing him the window, the 100 dead worlds, and the appraiser had not understood at first why one of the 100 was different. The others the ship showed him quickly, a glance at the silence, and then on to the next. But there was one world the window lingered on, longer than the rest, and the ship let the appraiser feel something it had not let him feel at the others. Not the cold lesson, something warmer, and sadder, and harder to carry. It was a world the ship had reached in time. Herald Vossen saw it the way the humans had found it. A young people, strong and rising and growing certain, exactly the kind that died. He saw the small gray ship warp into their sky, slow and ugly and leaking heat, and he saw them laugh at it, the way the inner ring had laughed, because the certain always laugh first. He saw the ship let itself be judged, and called weak, and mocked. And then he saw it speak, once, and hold their star in the dark, and give it back, and he watched a whole young people learn humility in a single hour, the way the inner ring had just learned it. And then the window showed him that world now, 1,000 years later, alive. Still strong, but careful, in the way the ship had taught them. A people that had grown old and great, and never once let its count make it certain, and so had never reached too far, and so was still there, in the light, when 100 others were silent. The ship had saved them. One ship, arriving on time, once, 1,000 years ago, and the warmth the appraiser felt was the ship's own. The quiet old satisfaction of a thing that had read 100 deathbeds and, just sometimes, gotten there first. Why show me that one? Herald Vossen had asked, when the window closed, his voice rough. Of all of them, why the one that lived? So you would know it can be done, Aya Maren had said simply. The dead worlds are the warning, but a warning with no hope in it is just despair, and despair makes a people reckless faster than certainty does. We do not bring despair, appraiser. We bring the four, and then we bring the one that lived, so that you know the medicine works. That world laughed at us, exactly as you did, and they are alive tonight, careful and great, because they remembered. You can be that world. That is the whole of what we came to offer. Not fear, not even the warning. In the end, the proof that the warning can save you, because it has, 1,000 years ago, for a people no greater than yours, who started exactly where you are standing now. It was that, more than the held star, more than the 100 silences, that broke the old appraiser open and remade him. Not the threat, the hope, the proof, shown to him alone, that the small gray ship did not measure peoples the way the ring did, by what they were, but by what they could still become if someone reached them in time. The ship had crossed the dark, not to judge the inner ring, but to save it, and it had brought, folded inside the warning, the one thing the ring had never thought to value, because you could not count it in hulls, a future. The ship had brought them a future, and let them laugh at it, and called it a 4. Harold Vossen carried that moment to the end of his long life, and never spoke of it, because it was not part of the story the galaxy needed. The galaxy needed the 4, and the held star, and the silence that fell. That was the warning, and the warning did its work, and 900 systems grew careful on the strength of it. But the appraiser, alone, in the highest gallery, on the day of the 4, looking up at the star a human hand had held in the dark, carried the other thing too. The world that lived, the proof, and it was that, not the fear, that made him climb the gallery every year for the rest of his days, and ask the star how many it had saved, and never get an answer, and not mind the not knowing, because the not knowing meant the number might be very large. The envoy of the Suthal Concord rose, in the highest gallery, and the hall turned to it, because the Concord had ruled the markets for 40,000 years, and had not yet spoken since the lights went out. The envoy stood for a long moment in the dark, an old and powerful creature, looking down at a small gray ship it had laughed at an hour ago, and when it spoke, its careful voice had something in it that the Concord's voice had not held in living memory. It had doubt. "You ask us to be afraid," the envoy said. 40,000 years we have not been afraid. It is the foundation of the ring. The count keeps the peace. A people sure of its strength does not gamble, does not lunge, does not start the wars that end worlds. You would have us trade our certainty for fear, human, and you would have us thank you for it. Why should the ring believe that fear will save us, when it is certainty that has kept us whole for 40,000 years? It was, Harold Vossen thought, a fair question, the kind of question the appraiser himself would have asked an hour ago, and he watched the woman answer it, and her answer was the last thing that broke the old certainty of the ring, because it did not argue. "I would not have you afraid," Aya Moren said. "Fear is not the thing. Fear is just what you feel today, because today is the first day, and the first day is always fear. The thing I would have you keep is the one underneath the fear. Humility, envoy. The knowledge, held quietly, every day, for the rest of your long history, that you might be wrong, that your count, however large, is not the law of the universe. That somewhere in the great dark, there is always a thing larger than your number, and the only people who survive meeting it are the ones who never stopped believing it might be there." She let the dark map turn one last time. 900 bright systems, none of them dimmed now, all of them whole. "Your certainty kept you whole for 40,000 years, envoy. I believe you, and it would have killed you in the 40,001st, because certainty always does in the end, to everyone, and the only mercy in the universe is to be made humble before it is too late to matter." She looked up at the old power that had ruled the ring. "I am not asking the ring to be afraid. I am asking it to remember the 4. That is all. A people that remembers the 4 will live a very long time." The envoy of the Suthal Concord stood in the dark of the highest gallery, and the markets it had ruled for 40,000 years watched it. And for a long moment the appraiser thought it would refuse, would draw itself up in the old certainty, and dismiss the small gray ship, and lead the ring back down the road to the 100th silence. The whole future of 900 systems, balanced on the old envoy's next word, and Harold Vossen, who had spent his life knowing what came next, did not know. Then the envoy of the Suthal Concord did the second impossible thing the hall had seen that day. It bowed, not deeply, not the way the appraiser had bowed, broken open. The envoy bowed the small, precise bow of an old power acknowledging, just barely, just once, that it had been shown something it could not unsee. But it bowed, and 40,000 years of certainty bent in that small motion, and every gallery in the hollow moon understood that the inner ring had just changed, quietly, forever, in a way that no fleet and no war, and no number on the appraiser's scale could ever have changed it. "The ring will remember the four," the envoy said. It was not surrender. The Concord did not surrender. It was something the ring had no word for, because it had never needed one, the moment a certain people becomes a careful one, and Harold Vossen knew that he had just heard the most important sentence spoken in the Grand Reckoning Exchange in 40,000 years. Ia Maren inclined her head to the old envoy, the judge to the judge, the strong to the strong, and the matter was settled in the way that the largest matters always are, between two who understand each other, quietly, with very few words. "Then we are done," she said. "The ship has spoken. It will not speak again, not in this ring, not for 1,000 years, because once is enough, and we do not waste it." She turned to the small gray hull, and the last door began at last to close, and the white line of light drew back into the nose of the ship and went out, and the hollow moon waited for the captured star to return. It did not return. Harold Vossen looked up at the dead sliver above them, the star that had lit the exchange without fail for 9,000 years, the star the ship had reached up and closed its hand over the moment he spoke his number, and he understood, slowly, that the humans had one last thing to show the ring before they left, and that it was not a memory this time, and not a map, and not mercy. It was the answer to the only question no one in the hall had thought to ask. Not how many. Not why one was enough. The other one. The one underneath even that. The question of what, exactly, the small gray ship had done in the half-second between the appraiser speaking his number and the lights going out, and how, and from how far, and whether the inner ring had ever, in all its 40,000 years of counting hulls, been looking in the right direction at all. The star above them stayed dark, and in the dark, the small gray ship began, very gently, to glow one last time. The last thing the small gray ship showed the inner ring was the dead star. It glowed once more, gently, and then it reached up, the way it had reached up an hour ago, and this time, it let the galleries see how it was done. The white line ran the length of the hull, and from the nose of the ship, a single thread of light went up through the dark of the hollow moon, to the captured sliver of dying star, and where the thread touched the star woke. It did not relight slowly. It came back all at once, full and white and steady, the way it had burned for 9,000 years, and the Grand Reckoning Exchange flooded with light, and 40 species flinched in their galleries from the sudden brightness, and from the thing the light revealed. The thread had not lit the star. The thread had let go of it. That was what the ship showed them, in the half-second before the brightness, a thing the appraiser would spend the rest of his life trying and failing to make the markets believe. The small gray ship had not put the star out an hour ago. It had reached up and held it. It had closed one hand around a star 9,000 years old, the heart of the exchange, the light the inner ring had built its greatest hall around, and it had held the star in the dark for the length of the appraiser's reckoning, gently, without harming it, the way a person might cup a candle flame to keep it from a draft. And when the ship was done, it had simply opened its hand and given the star back. Harold Vossen stood in the returned light and looked at the small gray hull and felt the last of his old certainty leave him entirely, because he understood now what the woman had meant. You did not ask why one is enough. The inner ring counted hulls. It had spent 40,000 years measuring the size of fleets and the throw of guns and the thickness of armor, and it had built a scale that ran to 10,000, and it had never once thought to measure the thing that mattered, because the thing that mattered could not be counted in hulls. The small gray ship had not needed a fleet. It had reached out, from a sled, on the floor of a hall, and held a star. And the inner ring, with all its instruments, had not even been able to tell that the star was being held. They had thought the lights went out. They had thought a fuse had blown. They had spent the whole reckoning afraid of a map and a cord and a count. And the entire time, above their heads, a human ship had been holding their star in the dark with one quiet thread of light, and not one of them had known. That was why one was enough. The ring had never been measuring the right thing. It had built its whole long piece on the count of hulls, and the humans had shown it, in a single gesture, that the count of hulls was the least of what the universe could do, and that the things which actually ended peoples did not appear on the appraiser's scale at all, because the appraiser's scale only measured the kind of strength you could see. "You held the star," Harold Vossen said. His voice was very quiet now. "The whole time. You held it in your hand." "Yes," said Ayamarin. "You could have crushed it." "Yes." "And the ring would not have known," the appraiser said, "until the dark came, and stayed, and never lifted. We would have died in the dark of this hall, not understanding what had killed us, not even able to point at the thing." He looked at her. "That is what those 100 worlds met, isn't it? The thing they could not point at. The thing too large to appear on any scale. They reached too far, and they met a hand closing over their star, and they died in a dark they could not even name." "Yes," said Ayamarin, and there was the grief again, the old grief of a people who had stood at 100 deathbeds. "That is what is out there, appraiser, past the edge of where your markets bother to look. That is what your count cannot hold. We did not bring our ship here to frighten you with what it could do. We brought it to show you what is already out there, waiting, larger than any number, for any people foolish enough to grow certain. We showed you a hand closing over a star, and then we opened the hand, because we are not the thing in the dark, we are the warning that comes before it. We held your star for an hour, so that you would spend the next 1,000 years remembering that a star can be held, and that the holder does not always open its hand." The captured star burned full and white above the hollow moon, and the Grand Reckoning Exchange was silent, 40 species in 40 galleries, staring up at the light they had taken for granted for 9,000 years, and would never, the appraiser knew, take for granted again. High in the 7th gallery, where the youngest of the inner powers kept their seats, a voice rose that did not yet know it should be afraid. It belonged to a war speaker of the Korath ascendancy, a people who had clawed their way into the ring only 900 years ago, and who still measured their worth, the way the newly strong always do, by how loudly they could refuse to bow. The war speaker had not understood the window. He had seen 100 dead worlds, and felt only that they had been weak, that weakness was a disease of lesser peoples, and that the Korath, who were strong, who counted 40,000 hulls of their own, had nothing to learn from a small gray ship on a sled. "This is a trick," the war speaker called down, and his voice rang in the hollow moon. "Light and noise, and a star you say you held. The Korath have crossed 40,000 hulls into battle, and broken navies that this hall has forgotten. We are not frightened children, human. You show us pictures of the dead and ask us to weep. Show us your guns. Show us one true shot. Until then you are a patrol boat painted gray, and your number is a 4, and the appraiser was right." The hall held its breath. Harold Vossen looked at the war speaker and felt a thing that was almost pity, because he had been that certain an hour ago, and he knew what came next for the certain. Ia Maren looked up at the 7th gallery with her patient eyes, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not show the war speaker a single gun. "You crossed 40,000 hulls into battle," she said. "Tell me, war speaker, how many came home?" The war speaker drew breath to boast, and stopped, because the honest number was not a boast. The Korath had won their wars, but they had paid for them in hulls, thousands of hulls, every victory a graveyard, and the war speaker found himself, for the first time in his life, hearing his own count the way an outsider heard it. 40,000 crossed. Far fewer came home. He had always called that strength. The woman had made him hear it, in one question, as the price of never having learned a cheaper way to win. "The small gray ship," said Ayamarin, "has crossed into 100 battles, war speaker. It has come home from every one. It has never lost a hull, because it has only ever had one, and it has never once needed a second. You measure strength by how many hulls you can afford to lose. We measure it by never having to lose one. Those are not the same scale. Yours runs to 40,000, ours runs to 1, and the day you understand which of those is the larger number is the day the Korath stop dying of their own victories." She let the silence work. "You want one true shot," she said. "I will not give you one, war speaker, and I will tell you why, because you are young, and the young can still learn this. A shot is what you fire when the other side might still win. It is an argument, We are not here to argue. The ship held your Hall's star in the dark for an hour, and not one instrument in 900 systems could find the hand that held it. There is no shot that says more than that. A shot you could have measured. A shot would have given you a number, and you would have gone home and built a hull that could survive it, and told yourselves you had answered us. We did not give you a number to answer. We gave you the dark, and the held star, and the 100 dead worlds, because those cannot be answered with a hull. They can only be remembered. Remember them, War Speaker. It is cheaper than your victories, and it lasts longer. The War Speaker of the Korath Ascendancy sat down slowly in the 7th gallery, and did not speak again, and the appraiser saw the certainty go out of him the way it had gone out of the whole ring, quietly, replaced by the thing the humans had crossed the dark to deliver, which was not fear, and was not defeat, and which the inner ring would spend 1,000 years learning to call wisdom. Herald Vossen looked at the woman with something close to awe. She had unmade the proudest people in the 7th gallery without a shot, without a threat, with a single honest question about their own count, and he understood that this, too, was the ship's work. The ship did not need to fire, because the humans had learned, somewhere out in the dark among the deathbeds, that the certain are never beaten by force. Force only makes them build a thicker hull. The certain are beaten by being shown, gently, in front of everyone, the size of the thing their count cannot hold. You do this everywhere, the appraiser said quietly. Every world. You never fire. We have fired, said Aya Maren, and the old grief moved in her face again. Once or twice, long ago, before we understood. It does not work, appraiser. You fire on a certain people, and you only prove their fear was right, and they go home and build, and the next time they are stronger and surer, and closer to the dark that waits for them. Force feeds certainty. It does not cure it. She shook her head. The only thing that has ever cured it is the four, letting them laugh, letting them be sure, and then, once, quietly, showing them the held star. There is no other medicine. We have looked at 100 deathbeds for one, that force could have saved, and there is not one. So we put the guns down a long time ago, and we built a ship that wins by being underestimated, and we have not lost a world since. She almost smiled. You called our plating thin, appraiser. It is thin because we do not intend to be hit, and we do not intend to be hit because we do not intend to fire. The whole ship is built around a single idea. The strongest thing in the galaxy never has to prove it. It only has to be remembered. Aya Maren stepped back toward her ship. We are leaving now, she said. Truly, this time, the ship has nothing more to say. She paused at the foot of the little gray hull, one hand resting on the scarred plating that the appraiser had called too thin, and she looked back at him with the patience that had never once left her face through the whole long reckoning. You will tell the story, appraiser. I know you will. You will start with the four, and the galaxy will laugh, and then you will tell them about the star, and they will stop laughing, and they will remember. That is your work now. It is good work. It is the same work the ship does, in the end. You will be the warning that comes before the warning. Commander, Herald Vossen said, and there was one more question in him, the real last one, the one he was almost afraid to ask. Where do you go now, when you leave? She considered it. Out, she said simply. To the next dead world, to read its leavings. To the next living one, if we can reach it in time, to wheel our ship onto its floor, and let it laugh at us, and call us a four. That is the patrol, appraiser. 100 deathbeds behind us, and we do not know how many ahead. We go where the certain peoples are, and we arrive, if we are lucky, before the dark does. One ship, it is enough. It has always been enough. She almost smiled. We will not come back here. You will not need us to. The four will do the work now. You will keep it alive, you and the envoy, and that broker, up in the 3rd gallery, who has not put his reader down since the lights went out. The 3 of you understood. The rest will only remember. But remembering is enough, for 1,000 years, and in 1,000 years we will send another ship, if the ring still needs one, to be laughed at again. She nodded slowly. I hope it does not. I hope, when our ship comes back, the ring takes one look at a small gray hull leaking heat, and remembers, and does not laugh, and welcomes it home. That would mean the warning held. That would mean we saved you. We do not get to see that very often, appraiser. Mostly we arrive too late, and read the silence. You are one of the lucky ones. Try to stay lucky. She stepped up into her ship, and the small gray hull woke under her, not with the white fire of the reckoning, but with the quiet, ordinary glow of a working vessel about to go back to its work, and the 19 doors sealed flush into the scarred plating, until they were only patches again, the marks of a ship mended on a budget, the 4 that the galaxy would laugh at. The great doors at the floor's edge ground open. The tractor sled was gone, sent away an hour ago, no longer needed, no longer believed. The small gray ship lifted off the floor of the hollow moon under its own power, gently, the way a thing lifts that has nothing to prove, and it turned its blunt, dented nose toward the open doors, and the dark beyond, and the inner ring watched the most dangerous thing in 900 systems go home, leaking heat on purpose, painted by hand, and not one creature in any gallery laughed. At the threshold of the great doors, the small gray ship paused. It did not speak. It had said it would only speak once, and it kept its word. But it turned, just slightly, so that for a moment, its blunt gray nose faced back into the hall, back at the appraiser standing small and old and changed on the floor of the exchange, and the captured star caught a single point of light somewhere on the scarred hull and threw it down to him, one bright mote, and Herald Vossen understood it the way you understand a thing without words. It was not a threat, and it was not a mercy. It was a goodbye, from one who judged to one who judged, the strong to the strong, the only 2 in 900 systems who fully understood what had happened in the hall that day. Then the small gray ship turned its nose to the dark and was gone, out through the great doors, out past the edge of the inner ring, where the markets never bothered to look, out into the true dark on its long patrol between the deathbeds, one ship, which had always been enough. The great doors ground shut, the captured star burned full and white over the hollow moon, and the grand reckoning exchange, the hall that turned the markets of 900 systems, sat in silence under the light it would never trust again. Herald Vossen did not judge another ship for a long time. When at last he returned to the floor, the species that came to be measured found a different appraiser waiting for them. He still had the eye, the best in the inner ring, 3,000 years sharp, but he no longer trusted it the way he had, and he told them so, everyone, before he spoke their number. He would look at their hull and read it, and then he would say the same thing he said to all of them now, the thing that became, in time, as much a part of the reckoning as the scale itself. I once gave a ship a 4, he would tell them, the best eye in 900 systems, and I called the most dangerous thing in the galaxy scrap, and I laughed at it in front of 40 species. So I will give you your number, and it will be honest, because the number is my work, and I am good at it. But you will not believe, when you hear it, that the number is the measure of you. It is the measure of what I can see. There is always more than I can see. There is always a hand in the dark larger than my scale. Take your number, and go, and never once let it make you certain. That is the only judgment that has ever kept a people alive. And then he would speak the number, whatever it was, and the species would take it, and go, a little more careful than they had come. The story of the 4 spread the way the woman had known it would. It went out from the hollow moon to all 900 systems, told and retold, and it always began the same way, with the laughter, because that was how the story had to start. The small gray ship, the 4, the 40 species laughing in the galleries, and then the dark, and the cord, and the map, and the star held in one quiet hand for the length of a reckoning, while no one knew. By the time the story reached the edges of the ring it had grown in the telling, as stories do, but the heart of it never changed, and the heart of it was this. The strongest thing they ever saw came in looking weak, and let them laugh, and spoke once, and the laughter died, and it left them alive on purpose so that the lesson would last. The weapons broker Sethric Oal never bought or sold another gun. He spent the rest of his 200 remaining years as something the inner ring had not had before, a teacher of doubt, going from system to system with the open mouth still saved on his old field reader, showing the young powers the reading no instrument was built to take, and telling them the one thing he had learned in the hall. You will be certain, he told them. You cannot help it. Certainty is what strength feels like from the inside. But there was a day I held the best reader in the ring in my own 2 hands, under my own lights, with the most dangerous thing in the galaxy sitting still in front of me, and I read it as a 4, and laughed. Trust your strength. Never trust your certainty. They are not the same thing, and the difference is 100 dead worlds. The envoy of the Suthal Concord went home to the oldest power in the ring, and did a thing the Concord had not done in 40,000 years. It told its people that it had been wrong, not defeated, not beaten, wrong, which was harder, and which the Concord had never had the humility to be. And the ring, which had turned for 40,000 years on the certainty of its oldest power, felt the certainty bend, just slightly, just once, and did not break, and was the stronger for it, the way a thing is stronger, that has learned at last that it can bend. And out in the dark, past the edge of where the markets bothered to look, the small gray ship went on its long patrol, one ship leaking heat on purpose, painted by hand, 19 patches in its scarred gray skin, going from deathbed to deathbed, and from time to time, when it was lucky, to a living world it could still reach in time. It would warp into some certain people's system, slow and ugly and weak, and let itself be wheeled onto some hall's floor, and let some proud expert read its thin plating, and its undersized guns, and its mended wounds, and call it scrap, and laugh. And then it would speak, once, and the laughter would die, and somewhere a star would go dark for the length of a reckoning, and a people that had never been afraid would learn, just in time, that the universe did not owe them their count. Harold Vossen lived a very long time, longer than an appraiser had any right to, as though the universe wished to keep its one honest witness on the floor a while. He never saw the small gray ship again. But every year, on the day of the 4, he climbed to the highest gallery of the Grand Reckoning Exchange, the seat where the envoy of the Suthal Concord had bowed, and he looked up at the captured star burning white over the hollow moon, the star a human ship had once held in one quiet hand, and he asked it the question he had never stopped asking, the one the ship had never answered, the one no instrument in 900 systems could hold. How many worlds, he asked the star, did you save the way you saved us? How many proud people are alive tonight, certain and careful at once, because one small gray ship arrived on time and let them laugh at it first? 100, 1,000, only us. He never knew. The ship had answered every question but that one, and the not knowing stayed with him to the end of his long life, the one open mouth no scale could ever close. And every year, looking up at the held star, the old appraiser gave the small gray ship the only number left that was honest. Not 4, not 10,000. He had no number for it, and he had made his peace with that, because the lesson of the ship was that the things which mattered most could not be counted, and a people that forgot it died of the forgetting, so he gave it no number at all. He simply looked up at the light that a human hand had once held in the dark and let go, and he said the words the ship had taught the whole ring to fear and then to honor, quiet, on the day of the 4, to the star and to the dark beyond it, and to whatever was out there still on its long patrol between the deathbeds of the certain. The number is the only thing that matters, the appraiser said, the way he had said it for 3,000 years, and then he said the new thing, the true thing, the thing the small gray ship had come a very long way to teach him, except when it is not. Except when the strongest thing in the galaxy comes in looking like a 4, and lets you laugh, and holds your star in the dark, and gives it back, and goes home leaking heat into the night. One ship, which was always, always enough. The star burned white over the hollow moon. The appraiser went down from the gallery, and somewhere far out past the edge of the markets, in the true dark where the count meant nothing, a small gray ship leaked heat on purpose toward the next certain world, and the next, arriving, when it was lucky, just in time.